Hi, everyone. The 2024 Environmental Stewardship Award nominations are now open. The ESA Awarding Committee will consider nominees' philosophy and management plan for range and cropland, riparian areas and water, wintering or feeding sites, manure, wildlife and wildlife habitat, and animal welfare. They will also consider nominees' involvement in the community, extension, and environmental stewardship activities, as well as their goals, implementation, and accomplishments. You can find out more about the Environmental Stewardship Award by going to abpdaily.com or albertabeef.org and get those nominations in before 11:59 p.m. on March 15th. I look forward to seeing them in my inbox, Deborah M at albertabeef.org. Hi, and welcome back to the Bovine. I am your co host, Deborah Murphy, and today joining me in the other co hosting seat is Kara Oosterhuis. Kara, welcome to the show and welcome to Alberta Beef Producers.
Hey, Deborah. Good to be here. Absolutely excited. Yeah, was it odd to say co-host?
It was hard, but it feels really good to have you here. I think we'll be talking throughout the show about some of the interviews I did almost a year ago that never saw the light of day, and I'm really excited to have your enthusiasm for podcasting and for making the bovine a priority again at ABP. Are you looking forward to it?
I love podcasting. There's something about, I've done work in video production and all sorts of different areas, and I think podcasting is always going to be my favorite. To just be able to sit down and really have a conversation with somebody is it's a really cool thing to do.
Well, people are more comfortable, I find, and the conversations are longer. And yeah, it's a completely different area of work. You mentioned that you have experience in this. Tell us a bit about yourself because a lot of our listeners might this might be the first time they've heard from Kara.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have worked in ag media, ag journalism, and I've worked ag communications. I've kind of been here, there, and in a few different areas of agriculture. I grew up just north of Bow Island, Alberta. That's actually where I am now. I came back despite leaving in high school. I was never coming back, and I was a typical small town kid that I left to go to Calgary, the big city of Calgary, took some college, took a broadcasting diploma at SAIT there, and then went and did my degree in communications at the University of Calgary. And I very quickly realized that the city life was not for me, and actually, Bow Island was not such a bad place to be. So came back home. I now live, my fiance lived just 2.5 miles from the family farm and love it. It's just a grain operation. Well, I shouldn't say just, it's a grain operation. We got a lot of different things going on, but no cattle here. However, I have done a lot of cattle coverage in the past, and like I said, did a lot of traveling for previous jobs I've had and had the opportunity to cover quite a few different cattle conferences.
Well, and you're also kind of getting used to ruminants with some smaller versions, right?
Yes. So, like I said, I grew up, we didn't even have a family dog growing up. We just had a ton of cats. We had cats and cats and cats. That was my livestock experience. And now my fiance and I actually have goats and have been growing our goat operation. It's actually been really cool to get to figure out what a pain in the butt they can be. My goodness, like it is Fort Knox and they still find a way out. But I think sometimes we look at how things are all separate and, well, that's cattle or that's goats or that's sheep, but they're all ruminants.
Well, and I think we're all so intertwined. We talked about it yesterday. You were at a crop conference, right? And there was so much valuable information that you're going to bring to the bovine from that crop conference that maybe our industries need to be a little bit better at overlapping.
I think it's amazing. Agriculture as a whole, we often talk, other industries talk about agriculture and we're all lumped under one, but really I think within we're quite divided. So I'm really excited to kind of try and maybe I'm just one person and you're just one person, but maybe we can break down those silos a little bit.
And I think one of our guests on today's show is going to talk about that. Did you want to talk about them, or are there other things we need to cover before we get into the show?
The only thing we kind of wanted to chat about is the bovine has taken a bit of a break just as
Yeah.
life has happened. It has been busy in all 15,000 directions. I'm sure our listeners can understand that, but we are looking at more of a priority, and I guess we're kind of looking at this as a relaunch of the bovine.
It
So
is.
we're season 2, episode 1 now, I'd say.
Yeah, I like that. We're kind of starting fresh, but not over.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing. We're continuously evolving, and I'm really excited to kind of evolve here too and see what direction the bovine goes in and where we can take it. So, I mean, I'm going to
Yeah.
say this a gazillion times, but we do want your feedback. So if you're listening and you have ideas, please send them our way.
Yeah, well, heck, it's even just nice to know somebody out there is listening.
Yeah, I'm not just talking to my wall.
Yeah, exactly. And so I started us off saying I'm a co-host, and that might be true for today, but for most of the interviews going forward, it will be hearing from you. And yes, I'm excited for you to take the primary role of the host seat and keep this as something that keeps going because yeah, as you mentioned, the last year, especially with the change, I kind of made a move at ABP, so I don't have the same job I had when I started the bovine, and so it's kind of we're juggling, but I think we're finding a way to juggle together, and it's going to work.
Juggling seems like a tough thing to do. I don't know if juggling together is any easier, but
I think you start with those like scarves or something. Like you don't start with balls. That's and definitely not eggs.
yeah, okay. I like it. We're
Okay,
juggling scarves over here at
we
ABP,
are.
figuring it
Yeah,
out till we can juggle the eggs.
that's that's right. You got it, Kara.
So let's talk about this year, 2024. We're in February now. January, I don't know about you, but January just flew by, which
It did.
is refreshing because let me tell you, sometimes January can be a dark, cold month and it seems to last 15 years. So it's nice that it went quick. But I think the next few months are going to go even quicker because we have a lot going on at ABP.
Yeah, lots of in-person meetings, lots of getting together with the cattle community. So in January, we saw the start of our producer meetings, which is always, like you said, a little bit hectic, getting things figured out. But we're about halfway through now. We have some representatives at NCBA in the States month, I guess, and then we have a few more producer meetings leading up to our annual general meeting, which is happening in Calgary at the end of February. So
So,
pretty excited to see people in person, Kara, as always.
oh, as always. So anyone can come to AGM. Let's just fill in if maybe we have a producer here that's never been to AGM. What can
For
they
sure,
expect?
yeah. So yeah, we have quite a few things on the agenda before our AGM starts. We'll actually hear from national cattle organizations, and then the start of the AGM is on February 27th. And yeah, absolutely, anybody can join us. We have 5 tables for our zone delegates at the front of the room, and then at the back of the room are our guests. And of course, we'd love to see registrations from our guests, and that way I can just make sure we have enough breakfast because our guests are welcome to join us for breakfast the following day. And we'll be talking resolutions, of course. We'll be hearing from staff, updates from staff, and then we'll also hear from our chair and finance chair of Alberta Beef Producers. So it'll be a great event, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of those updates because heck, it's hard to keep track of it all. It's nice to kind of see all of the things that we've accomplished together as an industry.
And it's not just me that's a new one there either. And as far as staff goes, we have a few different friendly faces you'll see there. So it'll be exciting for everyone to get to meet each other again.
Yeah, and some new delegates as well. So I think, yeah, make sure that if you're there, come and meet people and get to know your new representatives.
Coming up, as we said, there is the Alberta Beef Industry Conference. And speaking of ABIC, this podcast here today is going to focus a little bit on the past and a little bit on the future. Deborah, do you want to kind of explain what we're going to do here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, things got a little hairy in the last year, and I didn't get out all of the interviews. However, Kara had a chance to listen to some of them and kind of vet them. And so today we will do an all about ABIC, all about the Alberta Beef Industry Conference podcast, and we'll do a couple of segments from last year, and then we'll do a segment from this year.
Absolutely. And I think first up on the docket here, we have Bjorn Lomberg. He is a Danish economist and author. That'll be a fun one.
I hope so. It was interesting. Do we meet after?
Sure.
Meet you on the other side. Shout out to our partners at Alberta Beef Industry Conference and the 2023 media sponsor, Zinpro Performance Minerals. Zinpro minerals help animals achieve stronger nutritional status, enhancing growth while benefiting both producers and consumers.
Okay, so the climate world probably knows your name very well.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure the beef industry world does. So can you tell us
Sure.
a bit about who you are and why on earth you're here?
Yes, that's a good question. Or two good questions. So
Thank you.
I'm an economist, or actually a pretend economist. I work with many of the world's best economists, including 7 Nobel laureates. But I'm actually a political scientist. We're sort of the uneducated version of economists, and we try to find out what are the best use of money to do good in the world. And so a lot of those answers are, you should focus on tuberculosis, malaria, actually research into agricultural yield increases in the developing world, those kinds of things. But all this is, for most people in the rich world, very, very boring. So one of the things I do, and that's why you also said a number of people will know me, is that I also try to talk about what we do wrong, places where we waste a lot of money to very little effect. And climate is one of those places. So climate change is a real issue. It's man-made. It is a problem, but it's vastly exaggerated. So, a lot of young people, a lot of people in general, actually, in the rich world, believe that the world will come to an end. So a recent survey from the OECD shows that in the rich countries, about 60% believe that there's a good likelihood that humanity will be extinct because of global warming if we don't do something about it, which is just ridiculous. That's not what the UN climate panel tells us. It's not what we're actually seeing. It's a problem, not the end of the world. And this matters because if you're scared witless, as we are right now with climate, we're very likely to make bad decisions. So we make investments in the trillions of dollars, or at least we make promises of that, to very little effect. That matters because everyone is hurt by this. Also the cattle industry, also the agricultural industry. Everyone is told, you need to go carbon neutral, you need to stop all that fossil fuel emissions. And while, of course, in the long run, that is one of the ways that we should actually fix climate change. Trying to do that now is just going to be incredibly costly. It's not actually going to solve the problem because we don't get most of the world, so China, India, Africa, along with this. And of course, it ends up making really, really bad solutions. Just to give you one example, in the food industry, half of the world's population, so a little more than 4 billion people, are dependent on synthetic fertilizer, which comes from fossil fuels. Telling people you got to stop that is essentially saying, I'm sorry, are there 4 billion volunteers to leave the planet? And of course there are not. That's not actually what's going to happen. But what we're trying to do is essentially inadvertently, this is not because climate campaigners want to be bad people, but they end up making, for instance, food much more expensive, and that hurts especially poor people. That is a point that we need to make. We need to de-scare people. We need to get people to realize, well, this is a real problem. We need to fix it smartly, and we've got to stop making policies that are incredibly expensive and help very little.
But shouldn't we have lofty goals?
Yes, but shouldn't we have lofty goals and things that actually work really, really well? One of the projects, and again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to bore you for a second.
Okay.
But the world decided back in 2016 to set targets for the world till 2030. So everyone, Canada, U.S., Europe, everyone, I think Syria might not have signed up, but everybody else in the world have signed up to what's called the Sustainable Development Goals. They have 169 targets. So we literally promised everything to everyone. So that's all your lofty goals. They promised to stop war, to stop global warming, get everybody out of poverty, get everybody out of disease, get everybody educated, and all the other stuff that you can imagine. Quite a few things you can't imagine, like get more urban parks to handicap people in city centers and that kind of thing. All of it is nice, but we're not doing it because if you set targets for everything, it's essentially like you have no priorities whatsoever, and so you're not delivering on it. So I would argue by making lofty goals, although it sounds really good, it actually distracts you from what really matters, and those are often the boring things like, fixing tuberculosis, which is very cheap, fixing the fact that a lot of people are still starving in the world, which is fairly cheap. Those kinds of things, instead of saying, let's try to do climate change in an incredibly expensive way right now, which will cost in the order of 5-6 trillion US dollars every year for the next 30 years, about half of the global tax intake of the entire world every year. Things that are just not going to happen, but will deliver a lot of bad impacts along that way, which will inevitably make more people hungry, which will make more people poor, and which will also negatively affect, for instance, farmers here in Canada.
So what should we be doing? You're not anti-climate change.
So
you think that we should be moving
Yes.
forward.
Yes.
Don't be debilitated by our anxiety, but then what do we do with it?
So there's, if I had sort of a really quick fix, we would probably already be doing that. So
Well,
it's
what
going to
are
be a
we
little.
paying you for?
Yes. So let me do this a little more sort of detail. First of all, we need to stop scaring people witless, because if people think this is the end of the world, they are literally, and I find a lot of people in the rich world are unwilling and unable to listen to any other problem in the world. Sure, they're poor people, and sure, they're dying from tuberculosis, but honestly, we're going to be killed by climate change in 10 years, so that's all that matters. I understand that idea. If it really was a meteor hurtling towards Earth, we shouldn't be caring about anything else but, get Bruce Willis up there and deal with it. So I get that point. So first of all, we need to get people off that scare train. So I'm going to present a lot of those stories, tell you why, for instance, when you hear about all the hurricanes it's creating, actually hurricanes are slightly trending downwards. We're not seeing more strong hurricanes. Now, we believe that we probably will, but we can't notice that right now. So when newspapers tell you this, it's just not true. And certainly our ability to tackle these things, that is, our technological ability to keep people out of harm's way, which increases as you get richer, vastly outweigh any negative impact from climate change. So we need to first get people de-scared. Secondly, we need to recognize that our current policies are doing very little to fix climate change. So they're incredibly expensive, but they cover a very, very small part of the world. So it'll be rich, well-meaning Canadians, some in the US, quite a few in Europe, a little bit in dots around the rest of the rich world, which matters very little. And remember, we promised all this stuff, but we're actually going to deliver once it starts being really hurtful and people are going to start voting against these things. But what really matters, of course, is to get China, India, Africa on board. These countries are going to be emitting about 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions in the 21st century. And they're not going to say, sure, I'd love to have really expensive policies. So, and you're asking for the solution. So these were the things we shouldn't do. We need to realize the only way we fix big problems in the world is through innovation. So let me just take a little detour and take you back to the 1850s. In the 1850s, a lot of Western Europe and North America was lit up with whale oil, because whale oil burned brighter and better and cleaner than any other of those oils that were available. So rich people switched to this. That drove, a large expansion in whale fisheries that almost hunted the whales to extinction. Now, the sort of standard climate approach would have been to say, I'm sorry, we got to save the whales, so could you, turn down the light, get back to that sooty old fuel that you used to use instead? And of course, people would just have said no. What did solve the problem was we found oil. We found oil first in Pennsylvania and everywhere else, and eventually, and it's much, much easier to get oil out of the ground and much cheaper than going out in the middle of the ocean to kill a whale, just to get a couple of 100 liters of blubber. That's what saved the whales. It was not that we told everyone you got to be moral, you got to stop using that whale oil. It was that we found a better and cheaper and more effective replacement. We're going to have the same thing with climate change. One of the big reductions that we've seen is because of the shale revolution in the US that basically replaced a lot of really dirty coal with much cleaner, still not clean enough, much cleaner gas. That's the kind of way we should go. If you want to get cleaner, lower emissions in the next 10, 20 years, it's all about getting, for instance, China to frack. Now, this is not popular because it doesn't feel righteous and good, but it has that wonderful ability of actually being something that could work and work on a major scale that will actually make a big difference. So my point is, we need to invest a lot more in research and development in green energy. We're not doing that because we're so scared. You know, if you think, again, this meteor is going to come hurtling in the next 10 years, you're not thinking about, well, can we make a long-term 100-year plan that'll actually deflect future meteors? You're just thinking about how do we get rid of this one? But if you start realizing this is just one of many problems we need to fix in the 21st century, we're not going to fix it completely, we're going to fix part of it. How do we do this smartly? You can start to have a much more sensible conversation. Just like it's not, and that's probably one of the things that this audience would love to be, or is very concerned about. You know, we're being told you should go vegetarian. And this will somehow save the planet. No, it won't. It will cut about 4.2% of your emissions in the rich world. And remember, most people are not willing to do that. Partly, you could do this much, much cheaper and elsewhere. In the U.S. trading emission system, you could cut the same amount for about $7. So we're talking about something where you're trying to get people to change their entire lives for something that you could just have done with $7 somewhere else. That's just silly. And so again, let's get a sensible conversation about how do you actually fix these problems without the scare, but with a lot of sensible approaches.
Can't I have a little bit of scare, Bjorn? I think, otherwise, aren't I just going to continue to travel the world, to go to Mexico for 3 days and come back? All those little things are adding up somehow.
Sure.
So doesn't a little bit of that fear and anxiety, isn't that a good thing? Isn't it pushing me to improve myself?
So what research actually shows us, it leads you to do some things you feel very proud of, and then you feel licensed to do other bad things. It's a very well replicated study that, if you're, for instance, get people to recycle more, they feel more okay about going to Mexico because I just recycled, or I left my car and I biked to work
I have
today.
environmental credit here, so I'm going to spend
then I'm
it
going
here.
to do something. And honestly, again, I think it would be a very weird world where we make the best decisions if we're misled. As a researcher, I think that's probably not the right way to inform the world. But I also think that what we've actually seen underlines that, namely that if people are misinformed, they end up worrying incredibly much about this, being willing to spend a lot of resources on actually doing fairly little good. So take, for instance, Germany. Germany has probably spent about $500 billion on their climate policies. Since 2010, when they first instantiated the so-called Energiewende, their energy turnaround, they have managed to get their emissions, their reliance on fossil fuels down from 79% to, after $500 billion, 78%. No, that's not how you do that, right? Part of it is, of course, because they're also really scared about nuclear power, so they shut down the nuclear power plants, which particularly meant that they had to use more coal and gas. But the reality here is you need to prioritize. You can't just say, I'm scared about this one thing, and then I'm just going to do everything about that and forget about everything else. That leads to really bad outcomes. And honestly, also, is it a good world where you're scared about stuff you do? You'll still do a lot of it, but now you'll feel bad about it. Economists would tend to say, so back in the 70s, we worried about running out of energy. And so people were saying, maybe we shouldn't have showers anymore, at least not hot showers anymore. And so the idea was to make people feel really bad about having showers, but they'd still wash. I mean, you don't want to go around and be dirty. But so you basically have lots of people feeling really bad about themselves and still do it. Economists used to say, tax that. That's how you do it. You tax it, And then you take the shower and you feel, oh, I'm doing this for me. You know, and you know, don't do quite as much of it, but you do it in a way that's compatible with what the goals are. Now, if you want to cut it much more, you do it through innovation. That's, you know, the whales that we did in the 1850s. This is what we have to do today. We're not doing it because we're so scared. We're only focusing on the next couple of years.
So you may hear a lot of criticism about sort of carbon taxes, climate taxes. But is that what you're saying? That's what you're for here?
So I'm saying carbon tax makes good economic sense. Carbon tax should be, you should be very careful about realizing what it can actually do. Realistically, it can only do a small part of the solution. And also, if you do a carbon tax, you need to stop all other subsidies. And typically politicians don't do that. They just do carbon tax on top of everything else, right? You should stop subsidizing wind turbines and solar panels and all of this other stuff if you have a carbon tax. So there's a lot of things that need to go into that. But fundamentally, carbon tax is a sensible way to tackle part of the climate problem. But the main part and the main way you're going to solve this, it would be a little bit like taxing whales, right? You could have done a little bit for the whales, but the real way to do it is to find a different energy source. We're only really going to be successful as human beings if we have access to lots and lots of reliable and cheap energy. We have that right now, but it has disadvantage that it's fossil fuels and it leads to climate change. You're not going to change people's approach to that as long as you say, I'm sorry, the alternatives are going to be much more expensive. You know, people are going to do a little bit of it, but feel good and then go to Cancun as you talked about. But the reality is, if we can come up with much cheaper energy solutions that don't emit CO2, this could be fourth generation nuclear. But remember that also will only solve a smaller part because electricity is only about 20% of the total emissions. But if you had fourth generation nuclear power that was incredibly cheap, incredibly safe, and very, very reliable, everyone would switch. You know, so we have ways to see out into the future and see what the solutions are going to be, but they will only be possible if we focus on innovation, not on saying you have to feel bad about this.
A lot of people in the scientific community, you've mentioned misinformation, and there's a lot of criticism of you and your information. And who do we believe in your, well, I know who you think we should believe, but why should we believe you on this? Aren't you just cherry picking data? Aren't you just looking for what you want to find and then coming here to speak for the money?
Yeah. So a lot of people are criticizing me, as you say, because climate in many ways have become this almost religion-like thing that you have to say certain things, that things are getting really bad, that this is really terrible, and that we need to do solar and wind. If you don't say those things, you're kind of outside the narrow corridor of accepted speech. And so a lot of people will say, for instance, there was a recent in the German broadcaster, the public broadcaster criticized my story on one statistic that shows how many people die from climate-related disasters over the last 100 years. And the amazing thing is we have very good data for this. It's gone from about 500,000 people dying in the 1920s to 11,000 people last year. So it's reduced by about 99%. This is very, very well founded. And what they said was, that's misinformation because it doesn't fit the narrative. They didn't actually say the numbers were wrong because they couldn't. And even the people they interviewed said, yeah, they're right. But this doesn't feel right. We shouldn't be telling people this. In some ways, yes, because it doesn't scare people enough. And curiously, so Die Welt, which is one of the big papers in Germany, their science editor then took on the German broadcaster and said, I've looked at those data. I've looked at those people. I've talked to these people. What they basically are saying is, you are not allowed to make that judgment call. But what they're doing is making real fake news. I think that a lot of it, but I totally get that, you're interviewing me, and of course you would imagine that I say, well, what I actually say is right. But I think it's much worse than that. There is an obvious sense of entitlement in saying, this is the end of the world. So one of the most quoted guys in the climate community that is on the worried side, Michael Mann, constantly goes around and tells us we're so screwed and climate change is killing so many people. So last year on a TV interview, he actually said outright, and I have it on Twitter on the video clip where he says that climate last year, so this is 2021, killed more people from droughts, storms, and wildfires and extreme temperatures than all of the people that died from COVID. And that's just, miraculously, immensely wrong. In the order of sort of 800 times wrong. And this, nobody fact checked him. Nobody said anything about it. Now, I think everybody sort of quietly sort of curls their toes and feel a little uncomfortable, and then they just let it pass. And we have that constant conversation. And so one side is basically allowed to say whatever, the worse the better. And it's not because they're entirely true, because typically they'll put footnotes if we don't do anything, if we don't adapt, and if we assume the worst case outcomes and all this stuff. But the reality is, it is simply misinformation that ends up scaring your kids. Unlike what I try to say is, this is a real problem, but it's not the end of the world. And the data actually tells us. So the point that I was telling you about the carbon tax and the impact on the climate, that's also what I'm going to be showing here, is actually the only economist to ever win the Nobel Prize in climate economics, William Nordhaus. That's his point. And again, he's been vilified because he doesn't, conform to that narrow, narratively allowed corridor. And I think that's a really bad outcome. Just on the last thing you mentioned, am I not just here for the money? We actually use the funding for the talks that I give as funding for my think tank, the Copenhagen Consensus, where we try to advocate for all these incredibly boring things. And right now, you can look at my Twitter. Right now, I'm advocating for agricultural research and development for the developing world. So focus on yamps and sorghum and all these crops that you've never heard of that we don't invest in. Well, but that we never invest in because they're not rich people's food. But if we invested a lot more in getting those to give higher yields, that would help immensely in developing countries, both because it would give more production, which would be great for producers, at lower cost, which would be great for consumers. And overall, we estimate that for every dollar you spend on this, you'll actually make $33 of extra income for the developing world, for the poorest in the world. So that's the kind of point that I try to emphasize, that as long as we overemphasize and over-worry about some things, it inevitably means we end up under-worrying about a lot of other things. And so I want us to worry correctly about stuff, because it opens up the opportunity that we actually remember we have a lot of other responsibilities apart from fixing climate change. We should also fix climate change, but we should please also fix all the other challenges in the world.
And you've given talks like this all over the world, right?
Yes.
But this is a pretty specific audience. What do you hope in speaking here to the beef producers of Alberta, what do you hope they take away from this, and specifically for the beef industry?
So I hope two things. One is that their kids, just like every other all other kids, are scared witless. And so this is actually useful just simply to de-scare kids, to stop thinking this is the end of the world. It's a terrible burden to live with. And of course, if it was true, we should tell them that, but it's not. And so we should also tell them that this is not true. Likewise, their industry, just like almost all other industries, are faced with potentially enormous costs, because we're very worried about climate. And so we're going to say, you need to do something about climate right now, which often leads to very poor outcomes. Witness, for instance, in Holland, where we're saying now you can't fertilize anymore, or you can only fertilize very little, which basically means you have to stop a lot of agriculture. The argument is sound in the sense that it's saying we want less overburden of nutrients in the Dutch environment. But it's unsound in the sense that it realizes we're just going to push that to a lot of other places. Or, even worse, we're going to make a lot more people starving. Either of those outcomes are, I think, morally untenable. But that's what happens. And so I hope that the producers here will also take away some good arguments to try to calm down the conversation and make smarter decisions. Again, it's about these slightly boring things that we need to have, a carbon tax. We need to have a much more investment in green energy R&D, rather than these policies that will often end up costing us trillions and do very little good.
Okay, Deborah, so pretty much a year later now, and this is still super relevant, a really interesting conversation.
It was kind of a scary one, Kara. Like, I was nervous for this one.
Yeah,
I remember that.
and you see the headlines, you see, like, you already go, oh gosh, am I gonna have, does this line up with our industry? But I don't know. What were your thoughts on it?
I found it very interesting. I found Bjorn to be very confident. He's obviously done a lot of public speaking, especially in these recent years, as his, can you call it activism, kicks up a bit. And so I found that very intriguing. So you might have heard I asked some harder questions. I tried to kind of be a little tougher on him than I might on other interviewees. And yeah, there are things that I personally would agree and disagree with him on, but I found probably the coolest part of that interview was just that he doesn't want people to shut down because they feel guilt or overwhelmed by the climate situation, whatever that might be. And so that I found that very interesting.
And he discussed too, as he said, we're always trying to fit the narrative. So I think he kind of brought up that, how do we challenge and have those tough conversations on all sides? So I think from that perspective, it's really great to be able to have, like I said, those conversations, because they might not be the easy ones, and we can't always have the easy ones.
No, I think like controversy is so important. It helps us grow, and I think as long as you come into something with an open mind, you can have a pretty valuable conversation, whether you agree or disagree with the other people around the table. And yeah, I found Bjorn to be very interesting that way.
But anyways, speaking, we got one more conversation we got to look at, or we're not going to look, we're going to listen, because we are on an audio format here.
Audio thing, yeah.
And that
maybe
is
one day.
Maybe one day.
You'll do like the video podcasting?
Okay, so like, not to get off on a tangent here, but it really is, I think, the future. You see like all these, the top podcasters in the world, they're all video recording now, and maybe it's the introvert in me, but I'm like, I kind of like to sit in my dark room by myself and talk to you.
Also with you there, and that could be the mixtrovert in me. But the other thing is, like, I don't know if our rural internet would be really great to watch, because we just would probably be frozen for the majority of our conversation. So
well, and you and I are both actually rurally as well. So yes. you put in everyone else's rural internet, our rural internet. We might break the grid ourselves.
We'll keep it to audio for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, who's up next?
So Sandy Russell, she is the CEO of the Canadian Beef Breeds Council, and I definitely have a few thoughts on this conversation as well, and I'm sure you do too, but let's just get a quick refresher here and take a listen.
Thanks again to the 2023 media sponsor, Zinpro. Zinpro made all our podcasts possible at the Alberta Beef Industry Conference, and you can learn more about Zinpro Performance Minerals at zinpro.com.
So today we want to focus on the Canadian Beef Improvement Network, and I know you're in the industry too. We have acronyms everywhere, and sometimes we just got to start with the basics. What is CBIN?
Yeah, so we do love acronyms in this industry, don't we? CBIN is really a collaborative effort that's been talked about within the industry for several years now, but really gained momentum in the last couple years, led by the Canadian Beef Breeds Council and in collaboration with most of the major beef breed associations in Canada. And it really is focused on trying to break down some of the silos that exist in our industry, utilize the genetic data we do have, and improve upon the strong foundation we have here to help producers make better and more informed breeding decisions within their own operations, and then also funnel that information and get some bi-directional information flow throughout the entire industry with regards to genetics.
So how new is it?
Well, CBIN first started 2013, 2014 as an idea within the industry, but really got leverage in late 2020, 21, when we saw the breed association step up and put some financial contributions into this and start driving the importance of data-driven genetic decisions. And so we started putting together, we have a 4-stage development plan, we have an advisory panel, and of course the CBBC board is responsible and accountable for the initiative. And we've secured funding from various funding partners that have started to drive the initiative forward faster.
So who's part of that advisory council?
So our chair, Dave Sibbald, who is the chair of the Canadian Beef Breeds Council, is the chair of CBIN. We have ranchers, we have packers, processors, retailers at the table discussing the value of genetics and why they should care, or maybe they don't care, but asking those technical questions. So these are thought leaders in agriculture, not just in beef, but also, people who have been involved in development initiatives across various ag sectors, and have a vested interest in trying to see coordinated efforts such as CBIN occur within the industry. So it's really, we tried very hard to have representation across the entire production chain. And as we know, the Canadian beef industry, beef production in general, is probably one of the most segmented industries in agriculture. So we're a bit unique that way, and we want to make sure that we really start to engage everyone in the production chain. While it's driven at the seed stock level, we know we have to engage everyone.
So the breed associations aren't on that?
We have representation from the breed associations on that, but it's not solely them. There's one, they collectively put one person forward to represent them. And then we have, like I said, commercial cattle producers, feeders, packers, retailers involved. So representatives from some of the processors, representatives from some retailers, and the cattle feeding sector as well. So we try to really make sure we're covering all segments and why genetics, like I said, may or may not matter to them.
Are you seeing challenges when you bring all those different people together?
It's funny. I always say I'm far from an expert in genetic improvement. I know it matters to the bottom line of the industry. I know it's critically important, but as we came together as a collective kind of thought leaders within the industry, it became very clear that that's a theme. We know genetics is important. We know there's a lot of tools out there. I think, across the board, we were consistent in our message that we don't utilize them effectively. And we have a lot of room for improvement in the area of understanding genetics and driving that information throughout the production chain to better the end product, which ultimately we're all here to produce beef. So for me, that was the main why, way back when I even started getting involved in this sector, was I knew this was a critical foundation piece. So we talk about genetic influencers, those who can make the decisions about what genetics come into the industry, and then genetic utilizers. So seed stock breeders, purebred breeders, commercial cattlemen make the decisions of what genetics enter our production chain. Feeders, processors, they work with what they're given, right? So that's a critical divide as well.
So if I can summarize CBIN, could I say that what we're starting with is understanding the data, and then we're moving into implementing using that data, and then we're also somewhere in there trying to fix or improve communications about it?
Absolutely. So you just highlighted the 4-stage plan.
Oh, perfect, because that was my next question.
I'm glad the message is getting through, because first and foremost, we want to break down some of those silos. So the breed association specifically, but also, there's different management programs where producers put data in and utilize data. They're very siloed right now. And so we work and are building out to try to standardize, unify the way we collect data, and so that producers producers can access that and better understand it on their own operations, right? Second phase is really that analytical tools. So bringing in the technical experts, the researchers. We know in Canada we've got a bit of a gap in terms of how we coordinate and utilize the experts and connecting them with the industry. So we're trying to bring a more focused approach to that. Third is, the genetic literacy piece and bridging the gap in terms of understanding. And I always say, as a commercial cattle producer, I don't know a lot. So with some of the technical experts, I say, if you can make Sandy understand it, you can make the industry understand it.
Let's see some metaphors.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important that we put it in terms that commercial cattle producers and feeders understand, because we are not technical experts in the field. And I always laugh when the genetic formulas start getting put up, I glaze over. So let's try to avoid some of those. I know that's important, but I'll leave that to the experts. Put it in language I can understand. And I think some of the challenges we haven't communicated consistently as an industry, we all communicate in a bit different ways. So can we be more coordinated in that approach? So really it's about bringing that collaboration together and generating value for everybody within the chain.
Did we do all 4 steps?
We did. Probably not. We did. Step 1 is breaking down, standardizing, and unifying the data. Step 2 is the data, the analytic tools, and building out the resources. Step 3 is connecting the entire industry. So really the value proposition of the data itself through the entire chain. And then step 4 is really what I would call extension, KTT. And none of these happen in, it's not a sequential thing. We're working on all of these at different stages, but step 4 is that genetic literacy piece that's critical to success of anything within the industry.
Used another acronym there, KTT.
Knowledge and tech transfer.
Brilliant.
I apologize.
Thank you.
I told you we do love acronyms.
Yep, we very much do.
Yeah.
Do you run into the issue of, I'm in the beef industry, I don't want to share my data?
Yeah, I think there is. Collaboration is hard, right? It's a shift in an approach to how you do business. And if you truly believe there's value in collaborating, we all compete, whether it's individual producers competing within the marketplace, whether it's individual breeds competing for market share, whether it's feeders competing for calves or processors competing for markets. It is all a bit competitive. So quite frankly, it is hard to take that collaborative approach at times. But I think our industry has evolved and grown, matured a bit, and realizing that we've tried to do it alone for a long, long time. And we've not cracked into that connection between the role of genetics and feeding the high value genetics into the commercial industry. I always say, while we are very segmented, probably the biggest gap to bridge is between the seed stock sector and the commercial cattle producer. And I think we really need to do a better job of driving that information. We have a lot of extremely valuable data and information to inform those decisions. And so I think collectively, as an industry, and especially the leadership shown at the seed stock level, to say, sit down at the table and collaborate and say, we can get this done faster and better if we work together.
And I think you touched on what I was going to ask you next, is just that it can't all be data. These are relationships as well.
It's a people business. This is all about people and really being able to say that working together, we will achieve more for our industry and for the greater good, right? The whole is really what we're after. And yes, we will still compete, and there is room for that healthy competition within our industry. No one's saying take that out, but collaborate on really the common themes of how we can produce a better product more efficiently, more environmentally sustainable, all of those pieces that all of us are being so scrutinized for right now.
So basically this is building public trust.
It is a bit, yeah. It's driving that a lot of that validation and verification behind what we do as producers. That's a big piece here. The data itself will inform some of that. And as we all see these claims and targets being set, we have to be able to validate that we're achieving that. I use the example of, if we can eliminate the inefficient cows in the herd, how fast will that help us achieve those goals and targets that we're trying to achieve for the industry, for agriculture? Beef gets a bad rap sometimes. we have a 85%, 87%, my whole career in this industry, our weaning rate has not changed significantly in Western Canada or in Canada as an industry. And we find that acceptable. Could we do something to improve that number? What does that do for your economic impact on your own operation, but also the environmental impact of the industry? Significant.
CBIN won't change these things overnight, obviously. No. But so how are you analyzing whether or not you're moving in a good trajectory, that this is a successful initiative?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Deborah, because I think it's never far enough, fast enough for me. And probably what irritates some of my partners is that Sandy's constantly saying we need to be further ahead than we are today. But I think the main thing is, are we collaborating? Are we making headway on our goals? We're well into, phase 1 and making significant gains on standardizing the way data is collected, building the platforms that create the tools for producers to utilize in the long term. Those are positive wins. I think when I see genetics being covered at the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, when we know we're interacting and connecting with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, that collaborative communication is starting to make an impact. And seeing those wins and patting ourselves on the back for that and saying, yes, we are making headway. We got a long way to go. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are making gains. And I think that's important as we continue to move through this development process.
Well, this has really been just a snapshot at what you do and what you're moving towards. How can our listeners keep up to date with where CBIN's at?
Well, we're always working on better communications and better, resources are tight for everyone. We are in the process of developing a new website and creating some communication tools, so watch for that. We'll be doing a lot of communication at conferences and throughout the industry as we move forward. And so really, hopefully you're seeing it in publications, on podcasts such as this, or, working hard to communicate collectively as an industry on what we're doing, those of us who lead the stakeholder engagement with CBIN. So keep your eyes out. Hopefully you're hearing more about us and seeing things in terms of websites and that, in the next couple months. The other piece, I think, too, is really genetics becoming a bigger discussion at the beef table, and that's important. And so having those conversations and engaging with producers on that is critical, and we will continue to strive to do a better job of that all the time.
Maybe we should do a Genetics 101 one of these days on the podcast.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. I think I need to take that course and listen to that podcast. But that's one of the pieces. We're working with BCRC and some of our other leaders in the industry to really focus some of our resources to put it into language that, again, Sandy understands, or a commercial cattle producer can translate into their own decision-making processes, and that's critical. And I think genetics, it's not black and white. It's not simple. It's a very, very challenging piece, and once you start into it, I think it becomes overwhelming. And I had someone say to me the other day, I know it's important and I should care, but it becomes so overwhelming to me, I just set it over there. And so helping producers through that and helping them make those informed decisions for their own operations, because we're all unique, is really what CBIN and CBBC is trying to drive forward.
So, Deborah, what did you think there? Do you remember a lot from this conversation?
I remember a lot of my conversations with Sandy. I always enjoy talking to her. I think it comes back to what we talked about in our extremely long introduction at the start, and that whole collaboration piece. I like that, her points on that. I think that was something else that you and I had talked about a bit ahead, and I think that was something you thought as well.
Well, absolutely. I think the importance of collaboration and breaking down these silos, but however, on the other hand, healthy competition, healthy being the key word, I think is always important. I think I'm a firm believer in healthy competition, and I think, judging by the conversation there, Sandy is too.
Yeah, like seeing how all those organizations can come together and collaborate, but at the same time, they're not becoming one.
We talked about communicating outside of the industry. Like we often, you and I will talk about how we need to communicate to the urban audience, or we need to communicate to people outside of our agriculture bubble, but we also need to communicate within the bubble because
Hmm.
there's a lot of misunderstandings sometimes between different segments of agriculture.
Well, you can't know everything. And I think even within the beef industry, like I don't know everything. So how could I pretend to know everything about your kidding right now? Like
Mm-hmm.
not that you're kidding, but your
Mm-hmm.
goats are kidding.
Yeah.
That sort of
Haha.
thing. So yeah, exactly. Thanks. Oh, it's going to be awkward for a second there. Yeah, and I think that it's okay to acknowledge that we don't know everything, and that there are things that we can work together on and come together on, um, especially issues that hit us as what we feel is one segment of the industry. But then, sometimes I'll look around and see our counterparts in other commodity groups, for example, sending the same tweets, the same letters, and I'm thinking, yeah, we could probably have a more coordinated approach to this, but it's hard to know.
But I think that's why I love being in ag communications and getting to do stuff like host this podcast, because you get to, I'll never pretend I know everything, and you get to ask all these questions to all these people, and you're just constantly learning. So if you guys are listening to the Bovine and you feel like you're learning, chances are I'm learning alongside you, because
Yeah,
those questions are important ones, and I think creating an environment where you can ask those questions is so huge too.
absolutely. And I think that it is a benefit for us, is that we're allowed to have those conversations that might seem trivial. Like I think the reason I started this interview was because who all knows about the Canadian beef improvement, but not everybody is comfortable enough to ask. And I think that's a real strength in having somebody like you, Kara, join the show and ask those questions that we all kind of secretly want to ask, but don't have the strength or confidence to do so. So
Yeah.
thanks for doing that for us in the future.
Could one say I'm the sacrificial goat in this situation?
Yes. These were all interviews recorded at the Alberta Beef Industry Conference in 2023, and it's not far ahead. We've only got about a few weeks, maybe a month until the next one. Kara, you're going to be there?
Yes, absolutely. It's not my first Alberta Beef Industry Conference, so I'm excited to come at it kind of from a person in the industry now. So this will be really cool. But yeah, if any of you guys are there and you see me walking around with a headset or without a headset, please come say hi. I am fresh new face and would love to meet you all. Next up on the show, however, we are going to talk more about ABIC as I bring in a special guest. Stay tuned and we'll bring her right in for you. And welcome back to the Bovine. I am your host, Kara Oosterhuis. As you just heard, we had some wonderful speakers from the Alberta Beef Industry Conference last year, and now we are headed into the Alberta Beef Industry Conference for this year, for this season. And joining me here today, well, joining us, I should say, because I still, of course, have. Yes, you can't forget Deborah Murphy. She's still here with me, you guys. We have not lost her yet. Anyways, we have here with us Jennifer Brunette, who is the event manager for the Alberta Beef Industry Conference. Jen, how's it going today?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you? And thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I was just sorry, Kara. I wanted to say huge kudos to you, because I think it's been 3 or 4 years I've been trying to get Jen to talk on a podcast and it's never worked. So I'm so pleased to see her here today.
Well, I think it was a little forceful maybe on my behalf, because Jen was like, there's somebody else that could speak. Let's get somebody else to speak. And I was like, no, I think it'd be great if you'd speak. So, very
well, lucky you.
lucky us that we get to listen to you. So, anyways, as I said, we're coming up to conference season. Well, we're in the middle of conference season here, but arguably one of the great conferences is coming up, the Alberta Beef Industry Conference. Jen, what can you tell us about it? When are the dates?
The dates this year are February 28th and 29th, and we are actually really excited to be in Calgary this year. Prior to the event evolving into the Alberta Beef Industry Conference, it was a cattle feeder conference, and it was always held in Calgary. And as the evolution of the Alberta Beef Industry Conference came about, we were always away from Calgary. So this is going to be a bit of a blast from the past uh, for some producers for sure. So it's great to be in Calgary.
So last year's conference was held in Banff. That was kind of a special year, and I know Deborah and I were both there, and it was a real cool event.
Real
Why
cool.
was
It was like
last?
minus 5,000.
Yeah, like cool, actually very cold event, but hey, the people were warm, right?
Yeah, and the conference was warm. It was unique, as you said. We were in Banff for that one, and yeah, we saw lots of people make it out, even despite the very cold temperatures. It was a brilliant first go for the Bovine to be on site as well, and that was a really fun collaboration with Jen. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that happening again this year, especially with Kara helping out, because maybe some of the podcasts will be out before 2025. How did that happen? Yeah, so it was a brilliant event. And I'm looking forward to this year. Alberta Beef Producers will be hosting our annual general meeting there. And we're really excited for that as well.
Yeah, that's been a job in the making. Like, we were supposed to get that done in 2021, and then COVID
COVID was
hit.
the thing. Yep.
Oh yeah, and then everything just kind of fell apart. So yeah, we're excited to have the Alberta Beef Producers AGM on site this year. It's something that we were working on prior to COVID. And it's taken us a little bit of time just to get through all the logistical nightmares that COVID brought about. But now there's 3 AGMs happening on site this year with yourselves, the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association, as well as Western Stockbrewers Association, all taking place on the 27th through to the 28th. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool collaboration, being able to have that space together and that time together.
What's the I know you work really hard, Jen, to get a great lineup of people and some really interesting, thoughtful guests coming this year. Any insight can you give guests, or can you give our listeners a little bit of a preview?
Yeah, I'm excited about the speakers this year. Like as you were mentioning last year, we had some big names, and the big names were the draw. This year, it's the topics that I think are exciting that I'm really pushing this year. Maybe the names aren't as recognizable, but that doesn't mean that they aren't absolutely amazing. And I'm very excited to have some of these speakers that we're having this year. But we're focusing on all sorts of things, like sports performance and leading under pressure. I think a lot of that really applies to the industry. We're focusing on artificial intelligence, geopolitics, technology, the future of food, and where the beef industry sits in that. And then, of course, we also have staples like the weather and cattle markets. And we'll also be looking at the oil and gas sector and things that we could learn from them as an industry. And then, of course, no conference is complete without our Danny Hooper, who is emceeing again for us this year. So overall, I think the content will be great, and I'm excited for it.
And I can honestly say in my past, I've gone to a ton of conferences in lots of different areas, but I think some of my favorite conferences I've been to, or like speakers I've listened to, have been ones I didn't actually know their names. Sometimes the big names are really great, but then sometimes you're like, I have no idea who this person is, and I'm gonna go sit in this conference. And yeah, it's the topics that matter. I completely agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm notorious for not following a theme. I like to pick my topics and then pull a theme in and around it. But everything is very relevant this year. So I think it will be great.
And I think one of the big things that all of us look forward to that attend the Alberta Beef Industry Conference is the supper and auction. Is that happening again?
It is. I'm excited about the auction this year. So yes, we're changing it up. There's a couple of surprises this year I think that people will enjoy. So I'm not gonna give it away, but the auction's taking place on February 29th. We've partnered with some amazing charities this year from Alberta. Brady's Foundation, it's a new charity, just a couple years now that they've been operating, and they're 100% voluntary. So I'm excited about partnering with them. And Kids Sport Alberta, of course, they do some remarkable things in the province to help kids be able to play sports. So yeah, I'm excited to have those two charities on this
So
year.
how does that work for people who have never been? How much of the proceeds go to those charities?
So what we do for the auction is, so we have items specifically for for the charities. All of those funds 100% go to those charities, and then we also do 10% of the conference proceeds, or of the auction proceeds go to the charities as well.
Didn't you also donate to the food bank one year?
Yes, we did. That was a remarkable year too. With our partners, Cargill, we were able to donate 25,000 pounds of ground beef to food banks throughout Alberta.
Whew.
Yeah, it was no small feat. And the semis lined up at shipping and receiving were quite remarkable to pick up all that product and deliver it for us to the food banks. So, yeah, we've done some great things. Not only for companies and charities, but also individuals within the beef industry. And yeah, it's something I'm very proud of. I think it adds uh, it adds to the greatness that this industry is and does. And yeah, I'm proud
Uh,
that I represent these amazing producers that donate to the auction.
and this is why we needed you on the podcast. Finally, Jen. It's so good to hear some of your behind the scenes insight and also your passion for the conference.
And behind the scenes, that's what I was going to ask. Like, man, deciding what charities to go put that auction towards, and that's got to be quite a feat too.
It is. It is challenging because we try to spread it out. We don't stick with one. We move it around every year. Finding something that specifically contributes to Alberta and not nationally is quite a challenge. We also try to find charities that maybe aren't heavily funded already, to kind of give them a one up on an opportunity to get some extra funding. um, so yeah, it isn't easy, but when you do stumble across the right ones, it's pretty amazing. And then it's an easy put forward, like, this is what I think the suggestion should be. And everyone's like, yeah, I think you're right. And the charities are so grateful, like so grateful. It's yeah, it's great.
That's pretty incredible, Jen. And you lead a pretty diverse team of people that make this conference possible. Can you tell us about like the sponsors, the people that you go to with all these questions, you know? Yeah, everybody that makes it happen.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, you know what? The sponsors are key. I have, I really respect the sponsors that we work with. I understand their objectives, and I try to fulfill that to the best of my ability. Without them, we would not be able to put on the show that we do or bring in the speakers that we do. And in saying that, we wouldn't be able to bring in the attendees that we do as well. Over the years, we've been trying to evolve in a leadership type of event that really focuses on connections and networking, while learning and having fun. So, yeah, I'm truly grateful for all our sponsors. I encourage everybody that is planning on attending or who has attended in the past to, scroll through our sponsor list and really take time and thank those reps that you deal with, because they're heavily invested in this event, as are the attendees. Um, and yeah, it is appreciated for sure. And as far as who do I go to for ideas? Well, I can say that there's a lot of producers that get phone calls and text messages for me with tons of questions, but everybody seems to take time out of their way and lead me in the right direction. On the cattle feeder side, I do have a board committee that's amazing. It's a lot of weekend calls or late evening calls to try to hammer things out. And yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it without them.
I know lots of times with events like this, we like to target the next generation as well. Do you guys have any programs when it comes to looking at youth or bringing youth into the Alberta Beef Industry Conference?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I love that. So we do. Typically, we work with the post-secondaries. That's where we've been honing in on to offer rates for students to come. This year, specifically Lakeland and Lethbridge College, we have about 25 students coming in this year to attend the event, which I am so thrilled about. And then, a lot of the producers coming in, they're bringing their kids. They're bringing them and showing them what's exciting about this industry and why they should be involved and the opportunities that lie ahead. So I do feel that we have some great youth incorporated into our event. So yeah, I think this year will really notice, because there are a lot of students coming. Last year we missed that opportunity because we were over reading week. So I was happy to see that pick up this year, and that these students are coming in. But um, I know, some of these post-secondaries have told me, they have lineups of kids that are wanting to come. And actually the schools are doing essays and that type of thing to place kids in the available spots. So yeah, there's opportunity for more for sure. Um and yeah, we're open to looking at the future and what we can do to facilitate that.
And there's still space and time to register for this year's event, right?
There is, yes, there is. Our registration, the early bird rate is over, unfortunately, but we still have room. Typically, we start to fill up or start pushing our maximum capacity about 2 weeks prior to the event. So if you're thinking about registering and just haven't yet, I encourage you to do so. And the registration can be completed at abiconference.ca. All the speakers are there, the agenda's there, all the sponsors, of course, are there, and all the details about the Calgary Hyatt, those types of things.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there. Kara, you looking forward to covering the show?
Very excited. Like you said, we'll have the bovine. Well, we'll be there for Alberta beef producers, but the bovine will be there. So very excited to be covering that in whatever capacity it may be.
But thank you again, ladies, for having me. And I'm so excited to have you on site this year. And yeah, here's to a successful 2024.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Thanks, Jen.
Well, Deborah, that's all for episode 1. Yeah, we're calling it episode 1, season 2, episode 1 of the Bovine.
We are.
Absolutely.
First full episode, and it was a brilliant one, if I do say so myself.
I just give myself a little pat on the back there. Anyways, thanks for coming along on this journey with both of us. It's, I will say it is very interesting to host something with somebody else who is used to being the host of it. It's a weird. Okay, am I asking a question or are you asking a question? It's a little tricky.
Well, I always got that in university too when we'd go out dancing. They'd say, "Why are you leading?" And so I think we had a we had a bit of a dance today, Kara, and yeah, it'll be a little bit easier going forward until you ask me back on the show.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Stay tuned to ABP Daily and your favorite podcast apps for our next episode. And hey, like I said earlier, maybe you even have an idea for a future show. So please get a hold of me. Or maybe you have that question that you don't want to ask, but you want to give to your sacrificial goat. That's me. I will be happy to ask it for you. Maybe you even want to share where you're listening from. I mean, we are so excited to hear where you guys are coming from. Even if you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, chances are we feel like we're in the middle of nowhere too. So we can be in this together. Get in touch on social media by tagging Alberta Beef Producers and using the hashtag ABPs, the Bovine. Or you can personally catch me on my email, karao@albertabeef.org. So thanks, Deborah, for coming on and for co-hosting with me. And, I really look forward to not only my next show, but I look forward to the next time we can co-host.
Awesome. I do too. Thank you, Kara. Thanks for letting me join and enjoy 2024 with AVP.